Okay, so this is a brief audio for chapter 9. So, marriage is a private and public institution in a lot of ways, right? So, marriage is something that is sanctioned by the state, right? So, obviously, it has that kind of public aspect. But of course, it's also a very personal relationship between two people. So, marriage creates a unique relationship in profound and complex ways. So each couple creates its own unique social organization out of the kind of expectations of what marriage is in society. So the couple must work out mutually satisfactory solutions to crucial areas of potential conflict. So some of those conflicts are typically money, right? Not just how to make it, who has it, but how do you spend it, right? Often the division of labor within the house, right? Or even the decision making, right? Who's making what decisions? Each couple is going to have to kind of work that out independently. So there are some macro level influences on marriage we'll be talking about. So first, both members of the marriage have expectations. And these expectations they have about what marriage is or should be is based on cultural beliefs, maybe their religion, and often the norms of the community that they came up in, right? Or their family background. So that's going to influence what kind of expectation they have of either themselves being a husband or wife, or what the expectation they have for their partner in that relationship. So there are patterns across marriages that vary with social class, race, gender, and locality. And we'll be talking about that a bit. So these patterns involve gender behavior, right? So obviously, depending on your social class, depending on your race, your locality, what kind of gendered performance you have may be different. And of course, what kind of decisions are made in the household is going to reflect different power dynamics. What is appropriate sexual behavior within the marriage is going to be, very kind of specific to that group as well. So, there's often people that let's say swingers, right? People that they are fine with having extramarital affairs because they're open about it with each other. That's something that typically, maybe if you came up with different norms where that was normative, that would be appropriate to you. But if you came up in a very traditional sense and, this kind of idea of marriage means one sexual partner for life, then if one person in the partnership wants to do that and the other doesn't, that could cause, obviously, conflicts. And again, the division of housework. Housework is one of those things. People often have expectations by gender, right? Like some people think like, oh, I'm a man, I don't need to take care of a baby. And it's like, well, you made it, so you do. But anyway, there's certain expectations. We talked about this a little bit in class, how oftentimes our gendered expectations of housework really come from what our parents expected us to do in our own lives, right? Like I explained how my brother had to do all the outdoor chores, I had to do all the indoor chores, and that really kind of characterized for us a gendered expectation of what our adult roles would be. So some more macro influences on marriage. So first, marriage is a legal contract, right? States differ on what's allowed. So each state has a certain stipulation of how old you have to be, the distance you have to have between relatives. Oh, that's a fun fact. There's so many states where you can marry a first cousin. California is one of them. Okay, anyway, sorry, I had to throw that in there. Health requirements. Often there's a waiting period, depending on, inheritance issues, the division of property in the case of divorce. Oftentimes states differ when it comes to the specifics of the legal contract of marriage itself. So when it comes to the issue of same-sex marriage, Massachusetts was the first to legalize same-sex marriage in 2004. By 2013, 16 states and DC had approved same-sex marriage. And of course, by 2015, same-sex marriage is now the law of the land, right? So common law marriage is a little bit different. Common law is this idea that you have to basically be with a partner, but not legally married. And even the requirements for obtaining that common law marriage are very particular and different for each state. So most states it was about 7 years. And I think I made a joke about this in class, how I remember when the 7-year mark of living with my boyfriend came up, I made a joke about haha, got you now, common law marriage. But it turns out California does not have a 7-year common law marriage statute. Sucks for me. But anyway, he doesn't really have anything. He would just get my stuff, so it's fine. So anyway, only 9 states and DC recognize common law marriages, but the idea of a common law marriage is just kind of that you've spent a certain period of time together so that you get certain legal rights, like such as, things that husbands and wives have, like legal admission to like a hospital. So let's say, I've been with my boyfriend for 1,000 years and something happens to him and they say, sorry, family only, right? Well, I am his family. So that's kind of one of those situations where common law makes a difference. Certain inheritance rules and property and stuff like that. So basically, when it comes to marriage, typically, a couple has to agree that they're married to each other and that they live as husband and wife, meaning taking a person's name is pretty common, or filing your taxes together, all that kind of fun, get those tax benefits, right? That's what it's all about. But anyway, also another macro influence is religion. So if a couple shares the same religious ideology, their moral authority will be shaped by the moral authority of their religion. So conservative gender ideology, is sometimes going to be the expectation when it comes to conservative religions, right? So meaning in conservative religious ideologies, they really love that separate spheres crap, right? That women do the inside work, men do the outside work, that women take care of the babies and men bring home the bacon, that kind of stuff. Screw the economy and how reality actually happens, right? Because oftentimes, again, these institutions like religion set up our value systems for us. So, that can also shape marriages quite a bit, right? The religion. And societal gender expectations, right? None of us escape societal gender expectations. These shape marriages in different ways, right? So what society expects of men and women determines what's acceptable and appropriate and advantageous for husbands and wives. So there's been a shift in role expectations for men and women, meaning the new model is less patriarchal and more egalitarian, where women still end up doing more of the housework, child rearing, but it's much more shared than in the last generation or the generation before that, where expectations were completely split. So when it comes to recent trends, only 7% of US households fit the traditional model of father's breadwinner and mother's homemaker. When it comes to unmarried adults, the number of singles and cohabitating heterosexuals, whoop whoop, sorry, is increasing. So some of these people just live alone. Some live with roommates, which was an unfortunate stage of my life, or with an unmarried partner, right? And so unmarried adults now make up about a quarter of all households. So, we're getting there. Also, when it comes to like why people are cohabitating, it might be for multiple reasons, right? So often it's because people, before legalized same-sex marriage, people were in a same-sex relationship and they weren't allowed to be married, right? Or, like myself, people feel like they lack the financial stability for the kind of perils that brings. I mean, Jesus, a wedding is crazy expensive, which we'll talk about later in this class. Also, the idea that, the commitment itself often takes financial stability. So if you're going to say, like, I'm going to move on to this next chapter and be a husband and a wife, there's kind of social class expectations with that, right? So for some, staying single is actually helpful for their finances. So when it comes to the age at first marriage, the median age of first marriage is increasing for both men and women. But of course, marriage is still the norm in the US, with about 90% of people eventually marrying. So family size has also declined in the last 30 years, the average household size. And so it's interesting that these things are all kind of taking place at the same time period. People are waiting to get married till later, having less children, but often taking care of them much better. So when it comes to lifespan in marriage, there's a difference between this generation and earlier generations. And that's that people are now living a lot longer, right? If you live to 50 versus 90, your expectations for that life are going to be a little different. And that might change the way that you go about it, right? Like if you are going to die at 50, you probably do want to get married pretty young, right? But if you're going to live to 90, are you really going to rush that in there to make sure that by 18 years old you're married? Because that's a hell of a long time to stay with one person, right? So increased longevity is one explanation for the relatively high rate of divorce, right? It's because you live a long time, and a lot of people, even though they were at love or deeply in love at some point, just because of aging in life, they tend to grow apart, right? So it's kind of normative. So life expectancy for women has increased by 26 years and for men by 22 years, right? And that's incredible. So people often change in personality, and the longer their lifespan, the more the chance that they have of just growing apart. Some other recent trends, interracial or interethnic marriage. So obviously interracial or interethnic marriages are increasing, especially because they were illegal in a number of states until 1967. So obviously going from zero to something is definitely an increase. So the US public increasingly accepts interracial and interethnic relationships. It's really interesting. I have a mentor at Cal State Fullerton that she does this research on pairings between couples where one of the spouses is white and one of the spouses is black. And what she finds is that it's really interesting that who is the spouse that's white and who is the spouse that's black, like depending on if it's the husband or the wife, there are totally different gendered and racialized expectations about why they're together, right? So like if a black woman's with a white man, they're like, oh, it's for the money, right? If a white woman is with a black man, it's some sexual thing, right? So it's really interesting how like we stereotype the crap out of people. So when we take different racial groups and those kind of hierarchical racial expectations and throw them in the mix with gender and relationships, people have weird, awful stigma against these groups, right? So the extent of interracial marriage partly depends on the availability of marriage partners. We talked about this before, but the majority of people marry someone that looks like them, has the same social class, the same religion, the same everything. So, in California, we're pretty lucky to have a very ethnically diverse area where you come in contact with lots of people that aren't necessarily the same racial or ethnic group as you. But that's not as common in other places in the country. So a lot of people end up marrying someone of the same race, same class, same religion, same all that kind of crap, and also within a, small mile radius. When it comes to divorce, as of 2010, the divorce rate has fallen to 3.6 couples per 1,000 in the population. So that probably isn't a great figure. Basically what they say is about half of all marriages are expected to end in divorce, but it's more in the 40s. When it comes to remarriage, about half of all remarriages that happen, or half of all marriages in the US each year are a second or more marriage for one or both of the people involved. Meaning that the majority of people that are divorced remarry, which I think is super interesting to that. So it's this idea that there's a lot of variables that affect the probability of remarriage, but like people tend to think, oh, people get divorced because they hate the institution of marriage. Or a lot of people say the institution of marriage is failing. It's like, is it? Because I feel like it's totally succeeding. People are doing it more, right? You're not getting married once, you're getting married twice, 3 times, right? Like my uncle, that, he is already on his way to his 4th wife at this point, right? And so it's just more that he's not so great in the relationship. I think it's just more so that than the idea that he doesn't believe in marriage. Clearly he does, he keeps doing it. So it's interesting that half of all the marriages that are happening any time in the US are at least one person in that couple is remarrying. So a lot of variables affect the probability of remarriage. Men tend to remarry more than women. Why? Because women tend to be stuck with those kids, right? It's hard. It's hard to go out to the club and meet some dude when you got those kids, right? What's less hard is when your ex-wife has custody and you get to go date and be like, oh, I'm a single dad. Life is hard, right? So a lot of men end up remarrying more so than women because of that kind of, specifically if you're stuck with the kids, it's a lot harder to date. There's some good dudes out there that don't care about that, but not as many as there should be. All right, so is there any benefit to marriage? She asks herself. No, I'm just kidding. So research shows that marriage does benefit the partners involved in several ways. Several being 3, at least. They give you 3. There's more ways, but it makes me laugh. They say several, because 3 is not several. That's a few. But anyway, and the first is better physical and mental health. So that's a big one, right? Obviously, that's going to affect your longevity. Having someone that's going to kind of motivate you, and also, let's be real, like be a check against your deteriorating mental health. Someone's going to notice you're getting dementia because you're living with them. If you're living alone, not so much. also better sex lives. It's one of those things that people have like a kind of false idea about, is that, oh, the sex ends as soon as you're married. Actually, all research like on sexuality indicates that people that are married have more sex, and actually better sex, meaning more enjoyable sex, because it's not like creepy and weird and skeevy and like one night standish. And a lot of those things, it's like, there's this list of things in the world that sound better than they are, right? And one night stand is one of those. Like, there's a kind of thing in our culture where we essentialize, frivolous relationships based on just hooking up. But in reality, people have, if you have a more receptive sex partner, someone who cares about you, they actually care about making sure that you enjoy it, right? And that's obviously an important part of having a good sex life. And then, of course, having someone else around means having another paycheck. So having more economic resources is going to help you. You put, two heads are better than one kind of thing. You pool your money together, and that's going to help you in the long run. All right, so there's also some issues of not benefiting everyone equally, right? Such as life. So basically, the benefits of marriage change when race, class, and gender are factored in. So, also the poor do not necessarily benefit economically from marriage, especially true for racial minorities. So really there's this issue where sometimes there's what we'll talk about later as a his and hers marriage, right? The different based on your gender, right? So sometimes depending on that, it's going to kind of have another factor, which we'll discuss in a second. So not all marriages are beneficial. Some are also very abusive. So meaning that, oftentimes abusive partners are lured in, abused partners are lured in by their abusers, often by, very romantic, charming sentiments, and then they slowly cut off this person from their friends, from their family. They start psychologically and emotionally attacking them, right? Making them feel unstable, like they're not smart, they're not good enough, they can't leave this person is their everything. And then typically that's when they start really ramping up the abuse. And it's really sad because a lot of people say, why don't you leave, right? Well, actually, research shows that the majority of deaths that come from battering and these kind of abusive marriage situations come when someone's leaving. Leaving is very dangerous, right? It's why the shelter system was built, to try and get women out of houses so that they'd have some chance to go somewhere. Because if you have to choose between an abusive home and homelessness, remember, these abusers typically control everything in their victims' lives, meaning their money, their everything. So they'll often sabotage them from going to school, from getting good jobs, from doing things that could give them independence or self-pride. So in a lot of ways, especially if this person is in a position of authority, like a military spouse or a police officer's spouse or something like that, they have very little resources to leave. And then so when they do, that's usually when fatalities occur. So there's a lot of kind of misnomers and misunderstandings about this, which, if you transfer over to Cal State Floyd and take my family violence class, we talk about all day, every day. Well, really just 2 days a week. But anyway, really getting into there's a lot of these myths, right? Where people say, well, if someone did that to me, I would leave. Well, you don't really know that, because love is complicated. Relationships are complicated. When you have children, when you have people relying upon you, sometimes those decisions aren't as easy to make. It's much easier to look in from the outside. But it's much harder to just step into someone's shoes and actually try and understand why, right? How did they get sucked into it? Oftentimes, it's a cyclical problem, meaning that abusers don't see what they're doing is wrong because they themselves were victimized when they were children, or, often sexually victimized or something of that nature, and they're seeking control to kind of psychologically deal with their own trauma. So it's sad, too, because a lot of the people that are like the bad perpetrators are actually victims themselves as well. So the thing we really need to do in this culture is get rid of the stigma so people can come out and be, honest about what they've faced in, behind closed doors. The family is such a private institution that people really think, oh, well, that's not your business, right? And it is, because it's a societal problem, right? If children are being abused or neglected or harmed or sexually abused, that's a societal problem, right? If spouses are being battered and abused, that's a problem. If elders are being cooped up in nursing homes and abused, that's a problem. So we should care about all of these things, but oftentimes, what do? We blame the victim. We say, well, she should have left. That's her fault. Instead of maybe this person should not hurt another person, should not control another person. There's something wrong with our culture that we always just jump straight to victim blaming. But anyway, also there's partners that are abandoned by other partners. It's really interesting. Some of the earliest reasons for divorce, there weren't reasons for, like, you couldn't get divorced because you were battered. It took a long time for early first wave feminists to make sure that women could get a divorce because of abandonment. So these are issues that have been going on for a while. And so the economic transformations that have been going on in the last 30 or 40 years are closely associated with what people call retreat from marriage. So poor couples obviously experience added stress because they have difficulties meeting their basic needs. So in that way, and a lot of times, poor couples aren't going to get that economic advantage that others get from being married. And, children might not be better off when their mother remarries. So meaning that sometimes there's disruptions within the family because step families can get kind of, hard. It's a difficult thing to have someone feel like they're replacing your parent, right? Even though that's obviously not what a step parent is trying to do. But that can often cause disruptions to a child's living environment. They can negatively affect their well-being. And a lot of times, especially, we have this kind of thing in the culture where we're like, you have to have both parents in the home. But if one of the parents is an alcohol or drug abuser or abusive, then it's better to not have that person in the home, right? Because the kid is actually going to be much safer outside of that presence. Okay, so gender is a crucial factor when evaluating the benefits of marriage. So men and women who are married do not always share the same perceptions or benefits of the marriage, or same perceptions of a lot of things, right? So the sex-gender system structures women and men's family lives very differently, meaning the expectations we put on men and the expectations we put on women are pretty different when it comes to marriage. So there's some stuff we'll get into there. So when it comes to a husband's marriage, men receive greater health benefits than women from marriage, meaning that men live longer if they're married. Women, it makes no difference. So it's kind of sad. It makes me think of my dad, how he threw out his arm and he wouldn't go to the doctor. And my mom had to literally call the doctor and make an appointment for him and drive his ass there. And it made me think about that. That's why women have longer health outcomes, because our cultural definition of masculinity says men can't ask for help. And going to the doctor somehow falls under the category of asking for help, right? So there's a huge problem there, at least with gendered expectations. And husbands generally receive more social support in commitment and caring from their spouses than they may return. So husbands are getting a lot out of this. They're getting someone that cares about them, that loves them, that supports them, that makes sure that they're not sick. And so, men tend to work more outside the home. However, the workload does not equal women's work when household and childcare and emotional work are tallied in. Meaning men, especially in older generations, they kind of get away with some stuff there. There's this idea of oh, well, I'm home from work. I'm going to go sit on my ass chair while you make dinner and you this or that, even though she also worked, right? So obviously younger couples are more egalitarian when it comes to who makes dinner, who cleans the house, who takes care of the kids. They tend to share these things more. Women are still expected to give much more emotional work, right? Meaning much more oh no, how was your day? And that thing where men don't want to feign interest in what women are saying. Guess what, guys? Women don't want to feign interest in what you're saying either. They just do because they feel that it's the expectation to make this other person feel loved, right? So it's no one really likes doing that. No one's oh my God, how was your day? So excited to hear it. Do you know what I mean? But really, it's this idea that women feel the expectation to do that. So men actually kind of, by a lot of different metrics, kind of gain more out of marriage than women do, even though the whole thing's women are trapping men in marriage. But technically they get more out of it. So when it comes to this wife marriage, wives generally benefit from marriage but less than husbands. So their benefits appear to depend more on the quality of their union. So that kind of matters. It's not just about getting married, it's about marrying the right person, someone that doesn't suck. So women that are in troubled marriages are likely to experience health-related problems such as depression and immune system breakdown. So, the idea that when you're facing a lot of stuff in your life, it can actually kind of like get into your body and affect your ability to, like, your immune system to work. It would make you sick all the time and kind of break you down. So wives are relatively disadvantaged in marriages. Typically, they have to deal with this kind of patriarchal expectations of the society, plus their husband, and their secondary status at home, right? Where kids kind of expect more of them. Their husband might expect more of them than they give in. And that causes a lot of distress for these women. So when it comes to some of the micro aspects of marriage, in addition to the dynamics of gender, the partners in a marriage have to deal with, these some issues on an ongoing basis. Communication, right? And of course, sexual intimacy and decision making. So when it comes to types of marriages, there's some that are more successful than others. So a conflicted, habituated marriage are marriages that are centered on tensions, arguments, and fights, right? Where basically the only time you talk is to fight, is to have these kind of conflicts. And oftentimes that can be like the breakup, makeup, kind of tumultuous relationship. You don't want one of those. A devitalized marriage are typically couples who were once in love, but have drifted apart over the years. So, we talked about how over the lifespan increasing, people being married for 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, by then you're like, I'm tired of you. I'm tired of your face. They might have loved each other like deeply at some point, but they just kind of stay together because they feel bound by duty. They got married. They're in it for the long haul, but they're not like super stoked about it. Then you have what's called passive congenial marriages. So these are those who are, where love was not expected, but provides, the marriage itself provides stability for the couple to direct their energies elsewhere. So this you could think of as like more like arranged marriages, which are actually quite successful, where parents, when you're a child, arrange who you're going to have, who you're going to marry when you're older, usually as like a kind of kinship between family groups. And it's interesting that they don't expect to be in love. So that's not really the emphasis on it, right? They actually often do fall in love or have some sort of strong patterned friendship relationship, but, not in the same kind of like lovey-dovey way. Then there's vital marriages. Vital marriages differ greatly from the other types of marriage, in that spouses share true intimacy in all important life matters. So meaning that husbands and wives find their central satisfaction in the life they live with and through each other. That's like The Notebook, or no, I'm just kidding. Like any of those kind of things, like you want like your marriage sustains you, this person's your everything, blah, 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 right? And then there's total marriages, which hint, that's the one. So it's like a vital marriage, but with the important addition of being more multifaceted, meaning like it's not just all about your spouse. Because in that way, it's super unfair when you think about it. Like the kind of narrative we give women in the society about what they should put on a man is super unfair to men in a lot of ways, right? This idea like this dude has to be like a knight in armor that's like gonna be your everything, your best friend, you're the guy that kills the spider, the this or that. It's like that's a lot to put on one person to be like, you're my everything. You have to do it. You have to be all things. It's like that's not fair. You should still have friends. You should still have other family. You should still have other groups of people that give you happiness, right? That contribute to your identity. When you put it all on that one person, that's super unhealthy. So all of these types of marriages are by no means happy, but they are intact. When it comes to marital quality, there's a lot of factors that influence marriage quality. So first is shared social characteristics, meaning, again, social class or socioeconomic status, your age, right? I'm a big one on that one. Marry someone that knows the same cartoons that you grew up with, right? That makes it awkward if you don't. Race, right? Typically people get married in the same racial ethnic group. And intelligence, right? You don't tend to have people on the low IQ score range marrying people on the super high IQ score range, only because your interests and passions and the way that you understand the world is super different. So spouses who share those characteristics, social class, age, race, and intelligence, are more likely to agree. Also, when it comes to economic and personal resources, the higher the income, education, and occupational status of the couple, the more likely they are to evaluate their marriage as good. Meaning, if your life's good, like you're rich, you're happy, you have a great job, you've got some good education, then bada boom, bada bing, hey, my marriage is great too. It's like, no, your life's just great. When it comes to dual earner couples, dual earners are more likely to live a middle class lifestyle because they have two incomes. And as a result of the wife working, she's more likely to have self-esteem. But of course, this depends on how many extended hours or low satisfaction there is within the job. So kind of matters if you have a good job or not. When it comes to the division of labor, household labor, wives tend to spend about twice as much time on routine household tasks than men do. So satisfaction with the division of labor is an important predictor of marital quality. When it comes to role fit, this refers to the degree of consensus between the spouses on decision making, or again, the division of labor, or spending money, or issues involving their children, like how their children should be parented. So if there's a lot of consensus, then obviously that's going to positively affect marriage quality. If there's not a lot of consensus, like let's say one spouse thinks that it's okay to hit their child and the other does not, that's going to cause issues with role fit, meaning they're going to have less marriage quality, right? So when it comes to social class, the overall trend is towards a more egalitarian marriage for, working class couples. However, working class couples are more likely than middle class couples to accept traditional roles because of the kind of expectations that they have in their lives and the social roles that they have. When it comes to children, there's a consistent relationship between family stage and marital quality, meaning that marriage satisfaction tends to be greater before and after children. So, when people are like, oh, we'll have a child to save the marriage, yeah, that's not going to help because you tend to have a better marriage before you have kids and once they've left. When it comes to life cycle, marital quality tends to decline over the life cycle. So that's another issue too when it comes to marital quality. When it comes to communication in marriage, how a couple communicates predicts how well they're going to cope with the highs and lows of married life. So both particular interaction patterns and specific characteristics of communication between the partners are important. So a high level of positive and enjoyable interaction maintains and promotes marital satisfaction, while negative interaction erodes satisfaction with the relationship, right? So it's not just about how much you interact, it's about, is it a good interaction or not? So quality and quantity of communications are important in a marriage. Spouses with time-intensive careers, dual earners, and couples with small children may find themselves with too little time to communicate. So when asked, most couples would like to spend more time together. So this is a problem for especially people with time-intensive careers like doctors or lawyers or things like that, dual earning couples. They just might not see each other much. Or couples with kids, you only have the time before they wake up and after they go to bed to really just talk as yourselves. And that can put strain on, that marital relationship. When it comes to the sexual relationship in marriage, a good marriage and satisfying sexual relationship are expected to go hand in hand. That's not always the case, right? And large-scale national studies that they talk about in your book find that there's a high level of sexual satisfaction among married heterosexual couples in the U.S., kind of like we discussed earlier. Because sexual satisfaction is associated with love and commitment. How satisfied individuals are with their sexual relationship is going to be associated with both marital quality and marital stability. So as the duration of marriage and the age of the partners increase, the frequency of sex decreases. A couple's sexual relationship may be a powerful source of connection between them. But commonly expressed, conflict in marriage relates to a frequency of sex. When couples disagree over frequency of sex, it's generally the husband who wants more sex frequently, but that's not always the case. And the more that the research looks at these things, there's those societal assumptions that men are driving this, but really, that's not really always the case when it comes to the research in your book. When it comes to power and decision making in a marriage, there's certain sources of power in a marriage. So power in a marriage involves the ability of a husband or wife to influence each other. So first is resources. Power tends to accrue to the partner with the highest income or educational level, right? So you make the most money, that's probably going to affect you making the most decisions or having more power. Social class is another one. So working class families tend to be more traditional, while middle class families tend to be more egalitarian, right? They're more likely to split roles. Even if one person is earning more than the other, a middle class family is more likely to say, okay, well, we are both making this decision, right? When it comes to race and ethnicity, minority families encounter a different set of opportunities and obstacles than white families. And so that structures differences that affect family interactions, right? If you're not dealing with racial or ethnic discrimination in your life, whether that's from being targeted by the criminal justice system, getting passed up for promotions, or just not being able to get jobs, or whatever it might be, that's going to, kind of cause a whole different set of opportunities and obstacles. There's also individual factors. So several ascribed characteristics tend to favor husbands, meaning that, they tend to be older than their wives. So, people in that heterosexual coupling, women tend to be younger than the man they're marrying, which means that's probably going to give more power and authority to the man because he's older, right? Men are almost always taller and almost always stronger physically than women. And that's kind of like what we self-regulate to do, which is so weird. Like for me, like my boyfriend is like 6 something, 6'2", 6'1", something. He could date like anyone from like 4 feet tall on. For me, I'm 5'10", and if I date someone like 5'9", it's considered weird. So I'm basically stuck only dating tall dudes, right? So there's kind of like those weird gender assumptions about that stuff, kind of set up our expectations about how we want a partner or what is an appropriate partner. So that tends to, since that's what we're socialized with, affect even the structure of, who has power in a marriage. So when it comes to building an egalitarian marriage, there's a move towards less gendered interactions and decision-making and more quality in marriages. So this is a good thing. Marriages are going to be happier if the couples can share responsibilities. But not all couples share responsibilities equally still. Wives have moved into the labor force to help support the family, but husbands have not contributed equally at home with routine housework and childcare. When it comes to peer marriage, this is described as a husband and a wife who have successfully reconstructed gender role and are equitable in their interactions. So peer marriages have 4 characteristics. First, the partners do not have more than a 60-40 traditional split of household duties. And that's going to be gendered on who has the time, right? For the second part, both partners believe the other has equal influence over important decisions. Next, both partners feel they have equal control of family economy and reasonable access to discretionary funds. And fourth, each person's work is given equal weight in the couple's life plans. So the partners must agree on values such as who does what and, the primacy of this relationship over work, meaning, both of their careers are valued. So it's not as much as like one person gets a new job and the other person has to tear away. Like for example, one of my mentors, he has this kind of marriage where he got an opportunity to work in Toronto, University of Toronto, at a very great position there, and his wife already had tenure track at CSU Northridge, so she's still living here and he's living there. But he comes back every 6 weeks and has like 2 or 3 weeks here, and it's kind of different, but it's this idea that like they decided their careers are both important. She is not going to just pick up and leave her 10 plus years of work because he had an opportunity. Yet at the same time, he's not going to just stay here and languish unhappy while he has an opportunity he could be taking advantage of, right? So that's really kind of valuing each other as partners. So, the future of marriage, is it dying? So statistics show that behaviors are changing within marriage, right? Young people are delaying marriage. There's higher divorce rates, and the rate of people who never married, that's also going up. So some conclude based on that marriage is dying. But marriages are just different than they were 50 years ago because, societal conditions have changed markedly. So, the place that marriage has changed in society. The barriers to equality have been removed. So the institution of marriage does not occupy a less central place in society than it did in the past. It's just being transformed as society changes, like everything else.